All right, number 18 is a really good question. It is kind of one of those cases where you probably did it and think you got it wrong. I think you had no idea what you were doing. A lot of people do get it wrong, but once they see the explanation, it kind of makes a lot of sense. And it's a good example of a question where you're allowed to just stumble your way to the answer. We don't need to start every single SAT question knowing every single step that we're going to follow as we get to the end. We can kind of just wing it. And a lot of times that's going to still get us the right answer. So let's just break down this story. We don't need to understand it too deeply, but if we look at question 18 specifically, there's clearly some information in this story that's important, right? So we know that the depth must be at least 9 inches. That seems important. We also know that the height must be at least 5 inches. So that's 2 limitations there. And so when it asks for the values of the riser height, my mind is instantly drawn to that second fact that it must be at least 5 inches. So choice A doesn't make a lot of sense with that one piece of information. If it has to be at least 5, why would it be less than 5? That's wrong. It also makes me seriously doubt choice D. It's a little strange to see that 8, which is bigger than 5, is allowed, but 7 and 6, which are also bigger than 5, aren't allowed, and by that, inequality. So it seems to me like this 5 matters. Now, if you are just confused and need to take a guess and move on really quickly, this is a good example where you should be aware of the difficulty of this question. Not how you perceive the difficulty, but how the SAT perceives the difficulty. We're at question 18 in the calculator section, so there are 30 multiple choice questions in this section. And remember, they go from easy to hard, so we're kind of in the middle here. We're getting towards the hard questions, but we're not right there just yet. This seems like something that we should be able to solve, but it's still hard enough where I would be nervous about an easy answer. So choice B is the easy answer. That probably means it's a trap. And the reason it's easy is it's basically verbatim what the question is saying, right? The riser height must be at least 5 inches. Well, how would you write that as an inequality? You would write that the height must be greater than or equal to 5. That's exactly what choice B says. So that's a good sign in one way, but we didn't use this other fact that the depth must be at least 9 inches. And it's very unusual for an SAT question to give us information that we don't use. So the fact that we're kind of nearing the middle, the end of the test or the section here, that means it's probably harder than just reading the question. And then the fact that there's a piece of information I haven't used, I might just guess choice C. And be like, well, that feels like it's probably right based on some things that are unique to the SAT. The SAT's unique set of rules. And that's fine. Honestly, if you end up picking C here just because you need a reason to guess and you want to guess intelligently, that's okay. You can earn real points on the SAT just by kind of knowing the rules that they play by. But obviously, it's better if we can prove the answer is right. And we're going to do that without really doing much more complicated math. When I read this overall story, it's important that I go back to the story that's right below this diagram here. And it gives me an equation. So that's something that I would probably write down right outside my margins. Just, I want to get it out of the story and onto the page so that I can actually do something with it. Now, knowing my SAT strategies, I know that when I have equations, it's really good if I have points, because one of the best strategies on the SAT is to plug points into equations. A lot of times it's obvious when we have points in equations that that's what we should do. But sometimes if we're a little stuck, if we have one of those two things, we should ask ourselves, can we find the other? If I have an equation, I'm looking for points. And I've already used the h as 5, so I could plug that in, but I've already used it here. So this is a good example where I might use that the d needs to be at least 9, greater than or equal to 9, to kind of help me here. And I'm not going to get too complicated. I'm just going to plug 9 in for D. I know that D could be 10 or 11 or 12, but I'm going to just do the simple thing first and see what that reveals. This is a good example why stumbling to the answer is sometimes good, because if you plan too much, you get like paralyzed by all the information. So sometimes just doing the simplest thing and seeing what happens is the right way to go, because it maybe leads you on to the next thing, and sometimes these problems that you imagine you're going to have don't end up happening. So let's just plug it in. Let's see what happens. Plug points into equations. 2h plus 9 equals 25. Okay, well now I can solve for h. That seems like a doable thing. So subtract 9 from both sides. 2h is equal to 16. Divide by 2, and h is equal to 8. Well, that matches with my guess, right? So I might not, again, know entirely why, but this is more confirmation that choice C is probably the answer. And it is the answer, because if we were to keep increasing the value of D to 10 or 11 or 12, it's going to make the H smaller. So what's going to happen is that H can't be any bigger than 8. When D is at its lowest, H is going to be at its highest. And that's complicated, but to be honest, you don't need to understand that to get this answer. There's a lot of just like blindly doing math here that allows us to get the answer, and that is totally okay. So don't let yourself get intimidated by a weird story. Do what you can do what comes to mind. It usually doesn't take long, and it may get you the answer, or at least eliminate a few so that you can take a smarter guess. This is a great question to go from average scores to above average scores just by having a little confidence in your math abilities.